What's up, everybody? Reed here and Aaron.
And today we're going to be talking about all the legal psychedelics you can get in the United States. This is going to be a deep overview. So thank you for joining us today for our trip time discussion.
Yeah, so the first one on the list we're going to go over is Salvia Divinorum.
And next one is going to be Dextromethorphan, also known as DXM.
And then Amanita Muscaria.
We'll also be covering Hawaiian Baby Woodrose Seeds and Morning Glory Seeds.
And then we're going to do the San Pedro, Peruvian torch, and bridgessi cacti, which are part of the Echinopsis genus of cacti.
Then we'll be going into Glaucine, which is from Glaucium Flavum. Before we get going, I want to emphasize that this is separate from my role as a licensed psilocybin facilitator.
And this is separate from my role in naturopathic medicine. To clarify, we never recommend the use of illegal substances.
The Trip Time Essentials YouTube channel does not contain medical advice. Always consult a physician regarding medical decisions. All content on this channel is strictly presented for educational, informative, and entertainment purposes only, which is suitable for advertising according to YouTube guidelines.
So first, starting off with salvia.
Yeah, so our mechanism of action here, we have a very potent molecule in salvia. It's Salvinorin A. And it's actually the most potent naturally derived psychedelic compound by mass.
Wow.
So we know LSD is like the most potent psychedelic, but it's not natural. So this is the most potent naturally found psychedelic compound. So it's not absorbed orally, so you can't just swallow it, but it acts as a kappa opioid receptor agonist. It's a completely different mechanism from our normal serotonergic psychedelics, our classicals. So these kappa opioid receptors, they normally respond in our body to neurotransmitters called dynorphins. So you've probably heard of endorphins, which are like that feel-good opioid sort of thing, runner's high, that kind of experience. Those act on mu opioid receptors, but our dynorphins kind of produce a more dysphoric effect. It kind of counteracts like hyper rewarding stimulus. So you get a little bit more regulation in the other direction, kind of the opposite of an endorphin. And Salvinorin A, super unique. One of the only compounds we know that acts on kappa opioid receptors, and it's very potent, as we said. Very different effects from your serotonergic psychedelics.
Yeah, so when he says serotonergic psychedelics, those are more classical psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD. We'll get into some of the cacti as well, which can play off of this, which is that 5-HT2A receptor that's often being hit by serotonergic psychedelics.
Exactly.
Now hopping into some of the routes of administration. So this is how to actually get it into your body. Right, that's what we're going to be covering for each psychedelic we talk about today as well. Most commonly with salvia, we're looking at a smoking or vaping way of consuming this product, way of getting it into the body.
Yeah.
And so this is oftentimes done with salvia leaf or salvia leaf extracts, which may be getting used more commonly than people even realize.
Most common, if you walk into a smoke shop, you're probably going to find the extracts. They're often this little purple container. I won't name the brand, but that's often what people are using when they just go out and try salvia.
And they may not realize that either. They might just think that's salvia, but this is much more potent.
They actually take Salvinorin A and just add it onto the leaf. Like they spray it onto the leaf. Wow. So there's some variance in potency there too. It's really strong, and they make escalating strengths of extracts here. So we're not going to advise the dosage for the extracts.
Yes.
It's widely variable. Go ahead and do your own research if you choose to use an extract.
And always start slow.
Yes.
Right? Start low, start slow. You don't want to have too much. And as we'll get into with some of the effects that it can occur. But with dosage, with that normal dried leaf, right? Something that's not an extract, which again, maybe not as common, and you may not realize that you have an extract. But we're looking at usually between a 0.5 gram to 1 gram of dried leaf. So much more than if you're using an extract.
Yeah.
But again, do your own research. Make sure you're not doing that much if you're doing an extract.
Yeah, and use a scale.
Yes. Yeah.
Invest in a $20 milligram precision scale.
Yeah.
And weigh it out. That's our best advice if you're going to use this stuff. You want to make sure you're starting at that lowest end. You can't just estimate.
No, with any psychedelics, it's going to be based on that weight. You can never tell by looking at something. And so you're going to want to get, like Reed just mentioned, a milligram scale, also known as a jeweler's scale, right? So either one works. You can go ahead and just, again, do your own research. You can find those things on Amazon, $10, $20. whatever you want to find, they're very available. So some of the effects of salvia is, it's a rapid onset. So let's say you were to smoke this, you're going to feel this pretty quickly. And what that means is, it's going to climb fast, which you're going to get thrown right in. And that can often feel confusing. It feels new. You may not know what's going on because it's a little bit different than some other psychedelics. It doesn't climb as slowly. With this, there can be giddiness. There can be euphoria in some cases. People can be just laughing, right, having a good time. Also, what we often see, though, with some of these high dosages, which are what people may be getting if they're consuming an extract and don't realize.
Yeah, and they don't weigh it.
Yes, don't weigh it. Maybe they're just, they roll this extract into a joint of some kind and they go to smoke that. Then they're probably going to be in this high enough dosages category. And where that's, they may be seeing entity encounters. They may be entering other dimensions, reliving past memories, becoming objects, and various other experiences. So very hallucinogenic when on these higher dosages.
And even on the lower dosages, there's hallucinogenic properties, distortions to what you're seeing, very different from like a LSD or a mushrooms sort of experience. Very different visuals, very strange. Often a word people will use is like strange, confusing. And a lot of those emotions and perceptions probably come through that kappa opioid activity. It's like dynorphin-like effects, but to the extreme. So a lot of people perceive it as dysphoric, but there's actually a lot of people who have gotten benefits. There's some research studies on relieving cocaine addiction. There's just interesting mechanisms there. Definitely one to be used with high amounts of caution, and just be careful. Start very small if you're choosing to use this.
You hear a lot of challenging experiences with salvia, right? We're not trying to persuade you any way with this. Just again, giving you the most accurate information we can find, and a lot of that's because they're just doing too much.
Yep, exactly.
So then moving on to some more routes of administration here, right? We're looking at sublingual, which is in the mouth, right? Underneath the tongue, through the bloodstream, straight in right there.
And buccal is through the cheek membranes, kind of around the gums. There's very similar, just holding this leaf in your mouth.
And that's oftentimes you'll see buccal. That's going to be most commonly seen with like chewing tobacco. That's what we'll see people, packing a lip or something like that, or Zyn, all these new types of products going out there.
Yeah. And this is the traditional way that this plant is used down in Mexico, South America, where the plant grows. So this is historically what people did, and it's much gentler, much more mellow effects.
Lasts a lot longer. And so oftentimes when you're seeing something that is toned down and stretched out, then it's going to be a little bit less intense. But duration with this, with again, sublingual quitting, right? Packing it into the mouth in some way, you're looking at 30 to 90 minutes, but it's going to have to be in your mouth a lot longer to absorb to get to that point.
You have to hold it in for maybe half an hour sometimes.
Which is a long time.
And that saliva builds up. Not confused with salvia, but the saliva builds up when you have the salvia in your mouth there, and it's not very comfortable. So,
and not the tastiest flavor,
right?
Usually,
yes,
with a lot of these things,
But some people really enjoy this method. Some people struggle with getting effects from it though as well. Less reliable.
Sometimes if you're too attached or too challenging to let go,
I think just the absorption is very low. So it can happen, but it's easier with fresh leaf. Very hard to obtain fresh leaf. The dried leaf is usually what's available online. So
makes sense. Yeah, hard to ship wet leaf.
Yes,
because it molds and things.
Exactly.
All right, and then we're looking at the dextromethorphan, also known as DXM, and this is an over-the-counter cough suppressant that becomes psychedelic and dissociative at higher dosages.
Yeah, and it is approved actually for depression in lower dosages in combination with Wellbutrin. That drug combo is called Auvelity. So there's some precedent for its use in depression. This higher dose use is very recreational though at this point. So, but a lot of people have done it. And the mechanism here, we actually have a lot of similarities to ketamine through the NMDA receptor antagonism. So this is what provides that main dissociative element of the experience.
To explain to that, what dissociative means is we're looking at an emotional detachment from what's going on.
Yeah.
Oftentimes. So, right. That's why it can be used in therapy, when you're doing some sort of movement or maybe processing a memory, what it's doing is it's actually dissociating your emotional response to it. So you won't feel anxiety maybe about the memory. You're able to just process it kind of plainly.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the euphoric properties come from this blocking the NMDA receptor as well. A lot of people perceive ketamine to be euphoric. But what's really interesting about DXM as well is there's more going on here. So there's SSRI effects. We're blocking the serotonin transporter, which means you increase the amount of serotonin that's sitting between the neurons in the synapse available for use. So there's a very antidepressant property that comes from that, as we know with SSRIs being prescribed as antidepressants. And we also have this very interesting receptor called the sigma-1 receptor. And there's a lot less known about this, but we know now in research it's involved in the antidepressant effects.
In some way.
Don't
really know how or what's...
Yeah, we don't exactly know what's going on,
more.
But it is a very interesting mechanism. And DXM is hitting all three of these.
And then moving on here to some of the routes of administration, right? So this one is almost exclusively taken orally. Yeah. That's going to be how you find it. You're not going to see people, you can't really smoke this.
Right.
That'd be some convoluted way. Again, it's a cough syrup. So that's, or cough supplement.
Yeah, soft gels, tablets, sometimes there's different formats, but they're all made to take oral.
Yeah. And so dosages you're looking at here are between 1 to 400 plus milligrams. Again, no recommendation here. Just talking about what's common for getting some of that psychedelic effect. Duration wise, all right, assuming that the DXM is in the hydrobromide or freebase model, then we're looking at 4 to 8 hours. This is going to be the most common way, but it's always good to check the bottle of whatever you're taking.
Yeah, because there's this other format called DXM polystyrex, which is a longer lasting cough suppressant. So those effects can last 8 to 12, sometimes even longer hours. And usually less of a peak, less of a potential therapeutic, enjoyable experience, and you're really dragging on some of these effects that are maybe less desirable. So really make sure you know what you're taking.
Exactly, yeah. Do your research. Make sure you really examine the bottle of whatever product this is before consuming it.
Yeah.
And then the effects of this one are highly variable, right? Some people report euphoria. Some people are talking about disassociation, which should make sense, right? Disassociation should really be going on with all of them. And this can be strange or highly desirable. Again, for some of that therapeutic benefit, this could be good for processing memory.
Yeah.
And then you might also see some stiffness with the movement.
Yeah. This is colloquially known as like the robo walk. It's actually a term in the online communities. People walk kind of like a robot, very stiff. It's a strange thing when you see it. So it's yeah, definitely don't go out in public. Don't try to go do anything if you do decide to take this substance. And just be aware this is your body won't really be moving the way you expect it to. And this is from the dissociation. Yeah.
And then with that, we often see with that kind of movement-based and enhancement with dissociation, you're going to be getting some possible closed eye visuals as well. And these are going to be different than closed eye visuals of psilocybin.
Yeah.
All of these psychedelics that we've gone over so far are going to be different feeling than some of those classical ones.
Yes. There's some interesting mechanisms going on. Not always as clean of effects because there's more different things happening in the body. And one thing though that's very commonly reported is music enhancement, like this ability to sink into the music and really feel it. We see that on a lot of psychedelics, but for some reason with DXM, people report this to be like a very strong effect.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Notable frequency of nausea here as well. Definitely. So this is when you should take maybe some sort of nausea-reducing product, like we are producing a pre-trip supplement that will help with this.
Yes.
Possibly, right? And so that's something you could take. But also, ginger, other things can help with that nausea side of things too. But we'll have a different video on that.
Exactly.
Also talking about some of the, highly variable effects, what's really common, anecdotally speaking, is this afterglow that you experience.
Yeah. And what that means is like a persistent mood elevation that sticks around for a day, 2, maybe even 3 days. And then, there's, like we see with ketamine and other psychedelics, a longer lasting antidepressant effect, but there's a distinct sort of glow that some people get after use where the next day they just feel kind of on top of the world.
Some people call it like the honeymoon phase
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
experience, and then it lasts a couple days. Most psychedelics, I would say, have some sort of honeymoon phase.
Yes.
Except something like MDMA, which is maybe the
Calm
opposite.
down. So, yeah, definitely interesting. Next one here, Amanita Muscaria. Its mechanism comes through two substances. We actually have one, though, that is the desirable active ingredient, if you choose to use this, muscimol. It acts on GABA A receptors, completely different, distinct mechanism from any other potentially hallucinogenic substance. So we don't really expect as much in the way of visuals, more of a hypnotic, kind of sedative, dream-like effect. And it's through this very unique alpha-1 subunit of GABA A receptors. There's a few other kind of sleep drugs, like Ambien, for example, that may work through this. You kind of hear of people having strange effects from that drug. So it's very strange. You know, a lot of inconsistency in the experience reports, and a lot of that comes through this other compound called ibotenic acid, which almost does the opposite of muscimol. It's hitting glutamate receptors, NMDA receptors, and instead of blocking them like we see with DXM, it's agonizing them. It's increasing excitotoxic effects. So people will say amanitas are toxic, and they're right. If you don't process them, you retain much higher levels of this ibotenic acid, which can cause anxiety by hitting glutamate receptors, can cause neurotoxicity. So we want to eliminate that if we are choosing to use this.
Again, this is another thing to point out. Just be aware of your sourcing. And it might be hard to source something where you know that you're actually getting something with that ibotenic acid in it, but just do your best. And again, we'll do a video on each one of these so we can talk a little bit more about
we can dive deeper in future videos.
For administration, this is going to be most commonly oral, right? This is a mushroom. And so you're going to be eating that most of the time. That's oftentimes looking at, you know, if it's a dried amanita, it's got to be boiled, low enough pH for about 2 hours. And that's really just...
So yeah, that process, you don't even want to be consuming fresh or even just regular dried amanitas. They still have ibotenic acid.
Yeah. So that's why you have to boil it at that certain pH level to extract that.
Exactly. And it's actually the ibotenic acid is being converted into muscimol in that process.
Oh,
so not only are you just removing the ibotenic acid, you're actually increasing levels of muscimol, which is what you want. Go ahead and, if you choose to do this, dig deeper. We will have another video going deeper as well, but if you choose to do that before then, dig deep on exactly how you achieve that low pH, exactly how long to brew this, and then, it's consumed as a tea after this whole processing has occurred.
Yeah, definitely want to do your research there. Some people will recommend how to get that low pH and maybe some unsafe ways, especially when you're talking about boiling, right? Some chemicals or something that you're going to have that low pH for, it shouldn't be boiled and shouldn't be brought to a high temp. So you can also be looking at pre-converted extracts, and that can be used orally too. That's where something you might just buy and it's going to be pre-converted already. You don't have to worry about doing this conversion of the acid into the Amanita Muscaria, but you know, that's up to you if you want to go through the whole process there. Yeah,
much easier. And there's more companies nowadays that have lab testing for standardized muscimol extracts. Still be very careful. Some vendors are shady. So
again, be very safe with all of your sourcing.
Yeah.
And then talking about the dosage here. So we're looking at about 15 to 25 grams of dried amanitas. And this is approximately, again, we're not looking at really significant clinical research on this. So a lot of it's anecdotal.
Yeah.
And then if you're talking about an extract of muscimol, you're looking at 10 to 15 plus milligrams of pure muscimol extract. Yeah. And that's a product you would buy in advance separately.
Exactly. And duration to expect here, somewhere between like 4 to 10 hours. Pretty long range, kind of a longer acting one. And like we said earlier, the effects are more relaxing, sedating, kind of hypnotic, maybe dreamlike. And there can be a psychedelic effect for some people, but it's really not a traditional psychedelic effect. So don't go in if you choose to do this, don't expect a psilocybin-like experience.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like that.
Different mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be a different experience.
Exactly.
All right. And then moving on, we're going to be talking a little about San Pedro and other cacti here as well. So just a little disclaimer right off the bat. Most oftentimes when people are talking about psychedelics that are cacti, you're talking about peyote, right? That's commonly known because it's traditionally used.
Yep.
And peyote cacti are not legal to obtain. So just clarifying that right off the bat, you cannot have these, you cannot consume them, they're not legal to obtain.
Yeah, but in contrast, the Echinopsis genus, which contains different species, most commonly San Pedro, Peruvian torch, and Bolivian torch, species named bridgessi. These are the main ones in the Echinopsis genus. They are legal to obtain, but they're not legal to extract or sell for human consumption.
So highlighting not legal to extract, meaning not for the purpose of consumption.
Yep. But it is legal to obtain these. You can go into stores and buy one that's growing in soil. Many stores will sell the cuttings, which are meant to be grown, planted, rooted. So it's a bit of a distinction here. Do your own research. If you're not in the US, it may not apply to you.
Yeah.
But if we move on to the mechanism, this does contain mescaline, which is one of the classical psychedelics. Very long-acting one, and it is sealed acting through that 5-HT2A receptor like the other classical psychedelics. Interesting point on mescaline is that it's also acting on some stimulating receptors. So we have activity at the adrenaline receptors, alpha 1A and 2A, and also some dopamine receptors, D1, D2, and D3. So much more stimulating effects to be expected from the mescaline,
which is going to
cacti,
which will influence the trip too, right?
Yeah.
So you're, like, for example, psilocybin, although it's hitting that 5-HT2A, it's maybe a little bit less active than this one. It still could be, because sometimes we find that stimulation with that brain activity in general.
Exactly.
But this one is definitely hitting that adrenaline, gland and part of the brain. So
so you should expect more of a wakefulness, stimulating, maybe a little bit more euphoria sometimes, which is highly desirable among a lot of people. So.
Yeah. Moving on to talking about administration. Right? How do we consume the San Pedro or other cacti here? Oftentimes orally. This is, again, a plant.
Yep.
And so we're talking about consumption orally right here. It does involve some preparation of the cactus usually. You can't just go eating the cactus. You're going to want to prepare it in some way, and that's a highly distilled tea. And because of that, you're going to want to make sure you're actually utilizing enough of the cactus, which is going to vary per cactus.
Yes.
And that's why, the experience is going to vary. The dosage will vary. It's a little bit harder to tell here.
Yeah.
If you're doing it from the whole cactus.
Yeah. And you can do your own research on the different species of Echinopsis. And if we go do a deep dive on this, we can go a little bit deeper ourselves into that. But the potency, you might have an average potency to expect. San Pedro is typically a bit weaker than Bolivian torch, for example, but you also just have variety cactus to cactus.
Yeah. So
you can't perfectly predict your experience. The most common recommendation out there online, obviously not referencing any papers here exactly, but the most common recommendation is a 12-inch cutting. So it's a big chunk.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's prepared appropriately, but
and still
starting with that material.
Start slow, right?
Yep.
Even with this, it's going to be different. All right. And the duration is long. And so it's 8 to 16 hours. This is one of the longest lasting psychedelics we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Or could be, right? Some of that is going to depend on how potent your 12-inch cutting is.
Yeah.
and again, right, start slow, know what you're getting into. Some of the experiences and effects that come along with this are, highly revered. This is very traditional. People consuming cacti for psychedelic effects. You hear a lot about this for, hundreds, thousands of years even.
Absolutely, yeah. Some ancient use, or not necessarily ancient, fairly recent human history, but in North America, people taking this and going on shamanic journeys, but also taking this and going on very long hikes.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that's due to the stimulation that we saw with some of that mechanism, dopamine receptors, adrenaline receptors.
Absolutely.
So some people really like to take this outdoors in the summer, go on long hikes.
Yeah. Moving on here, we're going to be talking about the Hawaiian Baby Woodrose and Morning Glory seeds. So these seeds contain LSA and LSH,
as well as ergometrine, lysergol, and many other ergo alkaloids. So ergo is this type of fungus that grows on various plants, grains typically, but these seeds, the Hawaiian Baby Woodrose and Morning Glory, happen to also contain these ergo alkaloids. And very complex here, still a lot of ongoing research. They contain a lot of different alkaloids, and we do not know scientifically which ones are psychoactive. Some studies have been done on LSA on its own and has been found to not be that psychoactive. LSH, this lysergic acid alpha hydroxyethylamide, that one has been shown to have some level of potency, less potent than LSD, but so that one may be more relevant. But then there's also so many. Like I was digging through a paper, there's at least 10, 12, even like 15 plus other alkaloids in there, most of which are probably not psychoactive, but some of which probably
and we just
are.
don't know.
So a lot unknown here. The bottom line is that at least some of these alkaloids are acting on the 5-HT2A receptors like other classical psychedelics, and they're weaker by mass compared to LSD. LSD is extremely potent. So,
and LSD, right? Lysergic acid,
dimethylamide.
That's where you're going to hear, you maybe heard something like this before. That's from that LSD, also known as acid.
Yeah.
So your experience is going to be a lot less potent if you were to put LSD side by side with LSA or LSH.
Exactly. And there's also some other activity from these alkaloids at other receptors that can add some complexity. Similar to what we saw with mescaline, there is some dopamine agonist and adrenaline agonist activity from some of these alkaloids. And this can add to some of the side effects as well, which we can discuss.
Yeah. Again, that's going to be stimulating is what some of that means. And possibly mood enhancing or mood changing with that dopamine getting hit.
Yeah. And there's some complexity as well. Some of these alkaloids actually block some of the dopamine and adrenaline receptors.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of actions happening simultaneously. And some people actually report more of a dreamlike kind of sedated experience from the seeds. It's widely variable. Yeah.
And much like the others we've talked about today, administration is going to be done orally most of the time using an extracted version. So you're wanting a cold water extraction or some other more advanced method. You'll see this similar with you don't want hot extraction, right? You want cold.
Yeah, you're trying to avoid pulling out some of the harmful products in the seeds. And this is a good time to note that some people do consume the whole seed. You don't want to do that, ideally.
Yes.
There's other compounds in there, and actually many vendors of the seeds will spray them with toxins because they don't want people using them.
Wow. Okay.
So especially important in this case to do your research, figure out how to extract. The simplest way is a cold water extraction, but it is better and you get a more pure alkaloid product if you do a more advanced method. They're still quite simple. But yeah, do your own research on this one.
Yeah. And we're looking, what is the dosage here? 5 to 12 Hawaiian Baby Woodrose seeds or 100 to 400 Morning Glory seeds.
Yeah.
So again, potency very varying, and it's going to change a lot depending on the seed.
Most people opt for the Hawaiian Baby Woodrose because it's way less material to deal with. Especially if you're choosing to not prepare it appropriately. It's hard to choke down that many seeds. So
yeah, and some of these, just remember with consumption of psychedelics, consumption of different things, more mass oftentimes lead to more nausea or other negative side effects.
Yeah, and the big reason to do this extraction method, some kind of extraction method, is to minimize the nausea.
Exactly.
And some of the other side effects.
Yep. And so duration of this one, it's 8 to 12 hours. It's kind of similar to LSD with that length of time. And again, you're going to have to consume more mass than LSD to get to that same kind of feeling or similar feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And so these effects, while they can maybe be lumped into the same category as LSD, they're quite unique. Like, I almost wouldn't put them into the same category. From the experience reports we've looked at, there's some key side effects to be aware of. Vasoconstriction, which we do also see on LSD. It's more notable with these seeds, though, because it's not as refined of an extract. Like I said, there's so many alkaloids going on. So That vasoconstriction means that you get some cold hands, cold fingers, cold toes. So those extremities can become kind of cold, and you can't regulate your temperature as well. This can be uncomfortable. There's ways around this, of course, but
can also be unsafe if you're doing this in a cold environment, because then that's putting the outer extremities at risk.
Yeah. So you want to do this in a safe place if you choose to do this, and with all the proper precautions.
A lot of people do report positive and valuable experiences from these seeds, though. But again, right, be safe and make sure you do your own research before consuming anything.
Yeah.
So now talking about Glaucine, Glaucium Flavum, specifically from that family. So we're looking at Glaucium Flavum is a member of the poppy family, which typically contains alkaloid, nitrogen-containing compounds as their main bioactives.
Yeah, so glaucine is the main psychoactive alkaloid found in this plant. There's actually 2 stereoisomers of glaucine, S-glaucine, which is a full agonist at the 5-HT2A receptor, and the R form of glaucine is just a positive allosteric modulator of the 5-HT2A receptor. This probably means consuming a mix of both enantiomers would have more effects because you're hitting it and increasing the activity with the R form. And
what that blend is, not a ton of research there, so we have no recommendations.
And there's no extracts out there that I'm aware of that standardize to the different isomers. So there's probably a mix of them in there, but we do not know anything about how to achieve that proper ratio.
Exactly, But it's just something to be aware of too. And if you do see a product out there that talks about, how much is actually in there, maybe they've done a certificate of analysis and, went that path. Highly doubt that anyone did.
Yeah, but I haven't seen that. In the future, this may be pursued by more companies. But another distinction with the mechanism here is we have some blocking activity at dopamine receptors D2 and D4. This leads to a more sedated experience overall. And some people we'll discuss will kind of take measures to counteract that sedation.
Yeah, some people like the sedated experience, some people don't. It really just varies on what you're kind of wanting from that psychedelic experience, because a lot of the others aren't super sedating.
Yeah.
Administration-wise, this is most commonly consumed orally. Again, it's extracted, and so it's typically consumed in powder or just in a capsule, again, containing powder, but a little bit easier to get down because you're not having to taste that powder that you're consuming.
Yeah, and the average dosage here, again, this is a very preliminary compound, not a ton of research out there, but colloquially the dosage is seen somewhere between 150 to 400 milligrams. Some people push below or outside of that. Not a recommendation. This is just what we've seen with people who've chosen to use this.
Yeah, and if you were to try this, we would recommend starting lower, maybe even than the 150. See how it reacts with your body. You might be more sensitive than somebody else. You also might have a different ratio of that S versus R version of glaucine. And so, we just want to make sure you're being safe about this. Duration wise, 3 to 6 hours usually, but again, going to vary depending on your dose and the different kind of mechanisms that are being hit.
Yeah, and the effects, much less used. There's a lot less known about the effects, but like we said, it's kind of a sedative psychedelic hybrid compound. So some people actually prefer to consume stimulating substances alongside it to decrease sedation. This adds a whole other layer of complexity. Do not recommend this, but there's some people who say that they have enjoyed their experience more by counteracting some of that sedation.
Yeah. Notable mentions here. So talking about some other psychedelics that we're not going to really go into entirely.
Yeah.
First one being Blue Lotus. And so this is especially done in extracts or higher dosages, and that's what you really see lead to the altered states.
Yeah, it's not generally seen as a traditional psychedelic or even one of these strange psychedelics.
Yes.
There's some reports out there that maybe you get some slight psychedelic effects, but it's more of a hypnotic, sedative, and much less known about this. There's some opioid activity going on. We just didn't want to dig too deep into this one because it's if you're looking for a psychedelic experience, this is probably not going to get you there. Like we said, the extracts, some of these resins, I've seen them in vapes. They may produce some sort of effect, but it's probably not what you're seeking.
Yeah.
And, again, we can go deeper in future videos onto these. We're happy to, but we wanted to put them as a separate category here because these experiences are not quite what you would expect.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments if you do want a separate video on these. We probably won't produce one unless people are asking about it, and we are happy to, but we're also happy to go into even just some more detail in the comments if you have questions or thoughts about, where to get these. We'll talk a lot about that in other videos.
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to comment below.
Yeah, and then the next one here to mention is myristicin. This is a compound that's actually found in the essential oil part of nutmeg. So you may have heard of people consuming a bunch of powdered nutmeg spice, this is literally the same spice that you can consume on like pumpkin pies or sorts of dishes.
Yeah, it's nutmeg.
It's nutmeg. So, but the compound myristicin in high doses is more of a deliriant compound. So if things like Benadryl, these things that are anticholinergic, much less of a safety profile there. That's one of their mechanisms. There's some other stuff going on with myristicin that some people have enjoyed, but again, this is a completely different category.
Yeah,
we did not want to lump it in.
We don't really recommend this one, honestly.
No.
Or really any of these on these notable mentions, but they can cause some psychedelic effect, which is why we're talking about them.
Yeah, and the last one to mention here is yopo seeds. The whole genus species name is a mouthful. I'm not even going to bother with that. You can see it on screen there. And these actually, out of this list, are probably the most psychedelic of the list. They contain the tryptamine bufotenin. So this is, and it's a kind of a gray area because bufotenin is a scheduled compound, but the seeds are legal to obtain. So it's a complicated one. The mechanism of administration is typically like a through the nose. Someone shoots it through the nose traditionally with this little tube.
What's the name of that again? There's a term
snuff.
Snuff, yeah.
I believe, but
the term, when somebody will blow it into your nose, you also see that with some other things sometimes done alongside, like ayahuasca or in that kind of family as well, which we can maybe talk about when we go through ayahuasca and break down that video.
Yeah, so this one, this could maybe make it into the list, but because of the gray area aspect to it and the complexity of use, and there's some pain with that process of going into the nose, we just wanted to separate it out in a different category. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
to have dug into these. Hopefully it was useful.
Yeah, and we'll be diving into some others. Like I said, when we break down this video into smaller ones, we will go through each one. We will talk, where is it possibly safe to get some of these things, where to really avoid buying some of these things, and then, just really a deep dive. So thank you very much. Comment below if you have any questions. And as always, elevate your trip.